Hi besties and welcome back to my trash channel. It's almost been 3 weeks since I posted the last part. I'm really sorry. I just started getting insecurities about my writing and rewrote like most of it. But I'm trying to get my upload schedule back on track. I can't have you guys waiting weeks for the next part of this. But anyways, I've kept you waiting long enough. Enjoy the video. It was sure an awkward train ride home. It was practically silent if you could ignore the almost incoherent sniffles from the blonde that seemed to frequent more and more by the minutes. His mind was running wild and his emotions expressed that. More than anything, Atsumu was upset with himself. He knows himself. And once riled up, he cannot stop himself from speaking, which he wished was different. He knew his words were hurtful now that he had the chance to actually think about it, and he wished he could take them back. Though, all that was possible would be apologizing. Yet he still couldn't form the words. His bottom lip still occasionally trembled. His eyes flicked to his side. Kiyumi looked just as down as he did. His mask still covered his lower face, though his eyes expressed all the information Atsumu needed to know as they hunched inwards and were barely able to focus on his phone screen. Atsumu looked away from him before Sakuatsu had the chance to notice him looking his way. His eyes landed around Kiyumi's lap. More specifically, the right side of Kiyumi's thigh where Sakuatsu's hand stilled, moving every so often with the shaking of the train and clenching every few moments each time he choked back an apology that would be aimed at Atsumu. But Atsumu didn't want an apology. He should be the one apologizing, not Sakuatsu. He didn't want an apology. Sure, he didn't know Sakuatsu's exact intentions when he first said what he did, though it was probably not something bad. Sakuatsu would never try to purposefully hurt him. Plus Atsumu would have reacted in a nicer way. He gulped, his eyes suddenly sticking like glue to Kiyumi's hand as everything else surrounding them became somewhat of a blur. His own hand clenched in his lap before he shook his head and turned it the opposite way. He could feel the tears welling up in his eyes as his hand seemed to move on its own, quickly planting itself on top of Sakuatsu's. He couldn't see the latter's reaction, though he assumed it was some form of surprise as his hand flinched beneath his own, until he didn't move at all. Words muffled in Atsumu's throat as his free hand grasped at the neck of his hoodie, until finally, he choked an, I'm sorry. It was silent moments after. Sakuatsu didn't pull his hand away or reject his comment, yet Atsumu still did need to find the lost confidence of turning back around look into Kiyumi's eyes, which luckily came after a few short moments he could no longer handle to suspense of Sakuatsu's reaction. He was practically dying to know whether his apology had been accepted or not. His newly gained confidence allowed him to turn his shaky head Sakuatsu's way as he let out a short and trembling breath. And their eyes met. Sakuatsu was smiling, his thumb now rubbing over Atsumu's hand affectionately. Atsumu was emotionally drained. He didn't blame him for losing his temper earlier. His words hurt, but Kiyumi knew he probably didn't mean it. I'm sorry too. They didn't speak the whole way back. Yet Kiyumi's hand continuously rubbed the top of the blonde's, as if to say I'm here. Since he was. Atsumu just couldn't quite manage to stop the guilt that held strong in his chest. And he imagined it was going to stick around for a while longer. He had a lot to be guilty for after all. Not only did he shout at him, he's still lying behind his back about his feelings for Shoyo, which had for sure faded by now. And he was doing it all for his own selfish reasonings. Just to be close to him, just to be able to be hugged by him. He was pathetic. Sakuatsu sighed as he walked into his bedroom. He had an essay to write which he honestly could not be bothered finishing. The idea of writing only filled him with bore. He'd much rather be doing anything else, like cooking, or watching Netflix. Just something easy that didn't eat away at his mind. It was drained. Much like Atsumu's. He had a lot of information to think about. A groan escaped his lips as he dropped his body down onto his bed and quickly switched the laptop that was already laid in front of him on. This was the last thing he wanted to be doing. He wanted to make sure Atsumu was okay. The first thing the blonde did when he arrived home was go to his room without saying a single word. Sakuatsu wanted to follow after him, though he imagined that he probably would appreciate some space to process everything that had happened, which was a lot. At least that's what he imagined the blonde wanted, yet he was completely proven otherwise. Creaking floorboards only directed Sakuatsu's eyes in the direction of his bedroom door. There, Atsumu was standing just outside, and suddenly Kyumi was thankful that he'd forgotten to close his door. "Omi?" Atsumu called almost questioningly, though he walked into the bedroom after a short gesture of Kyumi's hand, ushering him in. "Hey." Sakuatsu was more glad than anything. He was now able to do the two things he actually wanted to do, which were to not write his essay and mostly see if the blonde was actually okay. Kyumi gestured to him a second time, coaching him further into the room until he stood just at the side of his bed, which he nervously crawled onto after some extra guidance. Sakuatsu smiled softly. "I'm sorry, Atsumu, you've already apologized." "It's no, Omi, I'm really sorry for everything." "Everything? The only thing you could be sorry for is for what happened earlier, and I'm sorry too. It's perfectly fine, okay? You were emotional, and emotionally drained," he uttered as he fixed his posture and sat up straight. His hand subconsciously trailed to the blonde's face where he rubbed his cheek softly. Atsumu only bit his lip and lowered his head nervously in reply, his cheeks highlighting the pink shade within them. "No, I mean, everything. I don't get what you mean. You have nothing more to be sorry for." Atsumu silenced, which concerned Kyumi as his body shuffled closer to Atsumu's, almost like he was preparing to give him a hug. They were barely inches apart now. "If there's something on your mind, you can tell me. What else do you have to be sorry for?" Atsumu bit his lip. "I'm sorry. It's okay." "No, it's not." His body tensed for a moment, as if he was about to start crying, though he held them back well enough until his body relaxed. His head plunged into Kyumi's shoulder and his arms quickly tied themselves around Sakuatsu's torso. It was easy to say that Sakuatsu was more than concerned, as he too imitated the actions of the blonde as his arms laced around his waist, pulling him into a warm and caring hug. Atsumu felt guilty. He was taking advantage of Kyumi's kindness and how willing he was to help him, and he knew he wouldn't be able to live with that. His arms clenched around the raven-haired male. He wanted to at least receive one last hug from him before he ended it. Before it all got too serious to handle. He had to end it now, or it could cause more problems and confusion down the line that he wanted neither of them to have to deal with. He gulped as he pulled away from Sakuatsu, until they were face to face, barely inches apart, that somehow both of them had become used to. It was unnatural. They were friends. They shouldn't be this close. "Let's stop this fake dating stuff." Sakuatsu's eyebrows furrowed as he pulled his head slightly further back questioningly. Comfortingly, Kyumi's arm traced up and down Atsumu's arm as he rubbed it. Whatever he had just said had clearly been on his mind for a while now. "Is this about earlier?" "Atsumu, I was serious. I really don't mind all of this fake dating stuff. And no, Omi, I think we should stop." "Why?" "Atsumu, I want to help you. Please don't be worried about how I feel about it all. I really do want to help." "No, it's..." He cut himself off as he bit his lip. His head ducked down lower as he stared at the small amount of empty space between he and Sakuatsu, only for his head to be picked up by Sakuatsu as he raised his head by the tip of his finger on his chin before he cupped his cheek softly, staring tenderly into the blonde's fragile eyes. I don't think we should anymore. Don't you want to get back with Shoyo? I can help you. I don't mind." "No, it's..." He bit his lip a second time. He couldn't exactly blurt out "I like you" out of nowhere. Kyumi's second hand mirrored that of his first, cupping Atsumu's opposite cheek caringly. He pulled the blonde closer towards him, resting their foreheads together as he began to whisper comforts. "Achu. It's fine really, Omi. You really don't have to worry how I'm feeling about it all. If I'm helping you, I don't mind." He spoke as he pulled him back into a hug. Atsumu simply didn't know how to react. He came here to end this whole fake dating stuff, yet he received only what the greed in his mind wanted. Kiyumi's arms around him seemed all too tempting. He couldn't help but collapse into them, thinking, I'll try again tomorrow. Kiyumi wasn't dating anyone else, nor was he acting this way with anyone but Atsumu. So maybe, at least partially, Atsumu could call him his own. It's okay, was the last thing Atsumu heard before a short-lived yet concerned and caring kiss was stationed on his forehead. Time had for sure passed. He didn't know how long they had been cuddled together for. He thought he had fallen asleep at one point, but he did recognize the feeling of Sakusa's arms lacing around his waist before he softly laid him down beside himself. Atsumu peeked his eyes open for a split moment. A few quiet murmurs escaped his lips as Kiyumi cuddled closer to him and once again placed a hand on his waist. SHH. You're tired. Go to sleep. Omi. Atsumu mumbled as he tucked his head beneath Sakusa's, which was quickly welcomed by the latter as his fingers began to trace through his blonde locks. He smiled before he replied. Atsumu took in a deep breath. He practically fell asleep. A wide smile on lips and a bright and bulging layer of blush rested on his cheeks, though he did manage to squeeze out one more sentence before he inevitably passed out. I love ya. Sakusa's eyes widened as he stared down to the blonde resting on his chest. He wasn't too concerned about the words. Well, maybe a little. Atsumu must have mistaken him for Shoyo or something. But what really concerned him was how the words made him feel. He gulped. A similar layer of blush as that of Atsumu's painted his cheeks. He felt his heartbeat pick up its pace as it tingled beneath his skin, to the point where he genuinely became concerned that it might wake up the blonde. Shit. He'd never felt this way before. The feeling was foreign, yet somehow the idea of it leaving damaged him even more. It was new, and nice, though he shook his head. This wasn't the time to be thinking about this. He had an essay to write. Atsumu was really tired anyways. He more than likely didn't mean it. He bit his lip as he reached to his right side with his hand, pulling the laptop that he had closed when Atsumu had entered the room closer to himself, ignoring the obvious blush that he could physically feel heating up the skin of his cheeks, nose and ears as he opened the lid and re-typed his password. But this feeling, it was almost too much to ignore. He loved it. He couldn't help but look back down at the boy resting on him. His skin was so perfect, and the smile on his lips could only be described in the exact same way. God, Atsumu was gorgeous. He tried his best to ignore the feeling, to ignore the blonde, but his urges to just look at him for the next hour seemed all too much to neglect. Kiyumi was woken by the feeling of shaking on his chest. He didn't even remember falling asleep. He let out a quiet mumble and his eyebrows furrowed before his eyes eventually opened. Tired. But it wasn't long before they'd be on high alert as they widened with concern. The picture of Atsumu quaking on his chest filling his view. For someone who had just woken up, Kiyumi was for sure filled with a whole lot of adrenaline as he quickly grabbed the blonde's shoulder and pulled him away from him slightly just so that he was able to see his face. He was crying, silently crying, only taking in minor gasps of air every second. Sakusa's eyes sank down with worry as he slowly shook him, only to discover he was dead asleep, yet crying. Sakusa had never witnessed someone crying in their sleep. Atsumu would be the first. Sakusa gulped. What if he was having a nightmare or something? It didn't take long for Sakusa to act on his worries as he began shaking the blonde softly, wanting to wake him up, though not wanting to scare him more than he probably was already. But the blonde didn't show any signs of movement. Instead he continued to sob silently, which only tugged at Kiyumi's heart. He couldn't just leave him like that, all alone, trapped in his own mind. He gulped before he grabbed both of Atsumu's shoulders, shaking him slightly more recklessly than before. He slowly began to speed up his shaking until he saw the blonde's eyes scrunch up and eventually open. His mouth let out a gasp of fright as body thrusted forwards into an almost seated position just below Kiyumi. Omi. Atsumu choked as he tried to steady his breathing that had ultimately been at its peak as soon as he opened his eyes. Achoo. Sakuatsu half whispered with a flood of concern in his voice. The blonde only gulped before he practically threw his arms at Kyumi, who instantly accepted them. Sakuatsu smiled as he pulled himself closer towards the blonde, until his head was resting just on his shoulder. You okay? Atsumu clutched at the dark hoodie Sakuatsu was wearing, refraining from letting out a sea of tears. What happened? Samu. And he choked back a sob. His whole body tensed as he dug his nails into Sakuatsu's skin, which pained the dark-haired male, but he decided not to say anything for the time being. He had worse to worry about. Yeah. Hey. It's okay. It was just a dream. Omi. Your brother is fine, okay? Sakuatsu continued to whisper short yet sweet little things into the blonde's ear, comforting him until his breath relaxed and his body settled after being so tense for so long. You can call him in the morning if you want. Okay. Sakuatsu wasn't sure what the time was. Heck, it probably could be morning currently, but it was still dark out. No light shone from around his curtains. Atsumu cracked a nervous smile through his tear-soaked eyes before he softly placed a weak and vulnerable kiss to Kyumi's forehead, settling his head down to the crook of Sakuatsu's neck. Kyumi hummed softly, seeing the blonde relax. See? You're okay. I'm here. Do you want to talk about it? Kyumi felt a short and subtle shake on his chest, which he assumed was Atsumu telling him no. He didn't have to see him to understand. Lowly, Sakuatsu smiled once again as his fingers began to comb through Atsumu's gorgeous blonde locks that were unfortunately a little bit matted due to the sweat formed from his nightmare. Sakuatsu ignored this. How Atsumu was feeling was his main priority. He could always wash his hands afterwards anyways. It wasn't like Atsumu was disgusting. Alright. Silence took over the room. The only hint of noise came from the blonde, who continued to rub his face against Kyumi's chest and tug on the hood of his hoodie, which Sakuatsu didn't mind. Omi? Atsumu hummed subtly. Yes. Will you stay? What do you mean? Comfortingly, his hand began to run laps up and down the blonde's back. Stay. The whole night. Of course. I'm not going anywhere. The pair both perked an equally soft and adoring smile to their lips, yet one far more tired than the other. Adrenaline was still barely settling down in Kyumi's veins, so he was much less tired than expected. Gradually, Sakuatsu felt the tugging of his hoodie and the rubbing of Atsumu's face on his chest slow down, until it stopped completely. Achoo? Sakuatsu whispered, checking his theory, only to be proven correct. A joyous smile remained on his lips and he shuffled slowly into a more comfortable position, his arms still entangled around the blonde's and his the same. He didn't want to risk waking Atsumu up a second time. One final sigh seemed to relax his body completely. He pulled his head to press against Atsumu's cheek. Kissing that same cheek was the last thing he recalled doing before his eyes plummeted to a close where they didn't open for the rest of the night. Sakuatsu sighed to himself as he took spoonfuls of his cereal into his mouth with a spoon. He had woken up alone. He was fairly excited to wake up and see the blonde's adorable red cheeks sleeping soundlessly on his chest. Just the thought of it dusted his cheeks a pink shade. He recognized that he adored every one of Atsumu's minor features by now, though he didn't receive what he wanted. Instead, he was greeted by the bare space of his mattress beside him and a tragically silent dorm room. Atsumu had a lecture this morning. Sakuatsu should have expected he'd be long gone before he'd even woken up. Sure, Sakuatsu hated too much noise, but he had gotten used to the annoying sounds that would come out of the blonde's mouth daily. So now he sat alone, eating his cereal with a bored and done look on his face. He couldn't be bothered to cook anything. It wasn't like Atsumu would be there to enjoy it with him anyways. He had a lecture soon too, which he had set off for. He had already packed his bag, so he wasn't in a rush. He took the last few spoonfuls of his cereal into his mouth and dunked the bowl into the sink before he half ran towards his room. He didn't have to. He just decided it would be better to go to his lecture early. He couldn't be bothered waiting around his dorm for no reason. Plus he was always far more productive when in the classroom. He had little to no distractions, meaning that he would probably actually be able to be productive and actually write some more of his essay. The due date was beginning to close in on him. Atsumu hummed a song that was stuck in his head as he closed the door and kicked his shoes from his feet. He couldn't be bothered neatening them up. He would only put them back on again once he left the dorm a second time. He wasn't so sure why Sakuatsu always made such a big deal about how they weren't placed net enough. He had relaxed a lot more since last night. His lecture gave him something productive to think about rather than what was making him sad. He'd also grabbed a coffee on the way home, which cheered him up a lot more than he had expected. What he needed was clearly an energy boost and a distraction. Atsumu clicked his tongue as he walked further into the dorm. It wasn't long before he could hear the low sound of the TV chirping away, followed by the almost aggressive sound of tapping on a keyboard. The blonde raised an eyebrow and began walking towards the living room, occasionally taking sips from his coffee cup. "Omi?" Atsumu asked in a questioning tone as Sakuatsu came into view, who instantly perked up at the sound of the blonde's voice. He smiled softly in Atsumu's direction from where he was settled down on the couch, stopped typing and settled his laptop down beside him instead of on his lap. "Hey, yeah, home early. Yay. I wanted to get home quickly. Seems you've been out later than me. I stayed a little after class. Prof set us a new assignment and I had a few questions. Plus I got a coffee on the way home." "I can see that." The blonde walked further into the room until he was just beside the couch. He removed his bag from his back and placed it just by his feet as he took a seat beside Sakuatsu. Momentarily, he turned his head up to meet Sakuatsu's staring eyes, only to look away the next moment. Just from that simple look he could already tell what Kyumi was dying to ask. Atsumu scowled. Don't you know what I mean?" His head turned down until his eyes were focused on his lap. He could physically feel the embarrassing sensation of heat dusting on his cheeks. He didn't even want to imagine how red they looked from Sakuatsu's point of view. He heard a scoff from Kyumi's direction, and just by that he could already tell he was smirking. "But are you okay?" "Shut up. I'm just asking if you're okay. No need to get so embarrassed." Sounds of shuffling grew louder, though Atsumu couldn't dare to look in the direction of where the sound was coming from. Though in the end, he probably wished he had, as he swore he had a heart attack the moment he felt an arm loop over his shoulder. "Let's just pretend yesterday didn't happen." "Well, it did. You okay?" "I'm fine, Omi. Now drop it." Sakuatsu chuckled and Atsumu knew he was just patronizing him. "But you had a nightmare. Do you get them often?" "No. I haven't had one in years." "Now leave it." "But Atsu." "Shut up. I'm fine. You wanna talk about it?" "No." "Do I hell?" Kyumi couldn't help but release a laugh a second time. "But you said Samu. Was he stealing your food or something? That seems like something you'd have a nightmare over." "Now you're just being blatant. Now shut it." Sakuatsu stopped shuffling his pan for a moment and left it to rest on the stove as he stretched over to open the cupboard. His eyebrows furrowed as his eyes became more focused on the dry contents inside of it. He scowled once he realized the one thing he actually needed wasn't there. "How did we use up all the rice?" His hand shuffled through the cupboard, hoping that there was maybe some hiding behind the other ingredients. But of course there was nothing. Only a half-opened pack of cookies that Atsumu probably opened earlier yet couldn't be bothered to close. Oh, the wonders of having an idiotic roommate. "Atsumu." Sakuatsu called and was actually surprised at the sound of footsteps coming his way barely seconds after he opened his mouth. The blonde must have really been bored. He'd usually have to call at least twice. It wasn't long before Atsumu appeared from around the corner, a phone in his hand as he rubbed his sore eyes. Is food ready?" "No, I've literally just." Sakuatsu cut himself off as he turned around and actually took the time to take note of the blonde's features and expression. Hurriedly, he turned off the stove and trotted over to the blonde as the feeling of worry took over him. "You okay? You look like shit." Thanks Omi. Sakuatsu placed a hand on Atsumu's shoulder, who only looked to the floor in reply. He knew he probably looked like he'd been hit by a ton of bricks, and he was slightly embarrassed about it. Just the thought of food instantly made him forget what he'd just been doing. But seriously, you okay? Fine Omi. He knew he wasn't fine. His eyes were puffy and sore with tears. His eyelashes still had a few hints of tear drops in them which he put effort into trying to hide. He wore an oversized burgundy hoodie and the hood was tugged tightly and comfortingly over his head. I was just on call with Samu. Osamu? Did you guys have a fight? What? No, nothing like that. Then what's up? Nothing. Okay. When's food gonna be ready? Starving. Oh right. About that. Kyumi turned back to where he left his pan and the open cupboard before he looked back at Atsumu. We don't have any rice. I was gonna ask you to go get some for me, but it's okay. I'll go. No rice. I swore I left a little bit. And don't take pity on me. I'll go get some. No. You're upset. I don't wanna force you out. I don't mind it. Neither do I. Okay. I swear. I'll go get some now. I don't have anything better to do anyways. Achu. Fine Omi. You worry too much. Atsumu finally turned his head. His own sad eyes finally met Sakuatsu's worried ones. Achu, what's upsetting you? I'm okay. Seriously. Just a little down, but I've just had a talk with Samu, so I'm feeling a little better. He smiled despite his whole face trying to force a frown. A short sniffle escaped his nose which seemed to awake him from some kind of daze. He shook his head and took a step back from Sakuatsu, smiling a second time. I'll go now, Atsumu. But the blonde had already begun walking to the door, nor did he appear to be turning back. Sakuatsu sighed. He really was worried about him. He knew he wasn't as okay as he said he was. That was a given. He'd probably had a fight with Osamu or something, but it was unusual for him to get so worked up over something like that. I'll be back. Atsumu called from the front door, this time dressed in a coat. The hood of his hoodie and the one of his coat were now hucked over his head. Sakuatsu sighed. It probably wasn't worth fighting him further. Atsumu was stubborn. Maybe the blonde also needed some fresh air or something. Do you want me to come with you? Sakuatsu walked closer to the door, though the pair were still a couple meters apart. Omi, fine. Get some work done on your essay and meanwhile, I promise I won't be gone long. Sakuatsu sighed. Fine. I'll just have to reheat the onigiri filling I made when you get back. You were marking onigiri. The blonde's eyes seemed to light up for a split moment. Something that Sakuatsu had missed seeing this whole time and what made his heart flutter. Yeah. Samu would be really jealous. I won't be long. I'll have to send him pictures later. Atsumu chuckled, rubbing his eye once again. See you Omi. See you. The blonde smiled as he opened the door, walked out and instantly shut it behind him. His smiling features soon formed a frown and a sob choked in his throat which he immediately tried to gulp down. Oh Omi. He barely could make out as he plucked the courage to begin walking to the store. Meanwhile, Sakuatsu walked back to the kitchen. He sighed. He felt guilty for letting the blonde go like that, but there wasn't exactly much else he could do. The blonde would never give in if Sakuatsu kept fighting back. He sighed. He wasn't so sure of what else he should do. He couldn't exactly finish off cooking. He didn't have the ingredients after all. He supposed he should probably just do what Atsumu had suggested. Writing his essay wasn't a bad idea. He only had a few more paragraphs left to write. Well, that's what he thought he'd end up doing, until he felt his phone buzz in his pocket. He was a little startled. No one ever really rang him. Only Atsumu when he needed something or Komori occasionally when they'd catch up. He pulled his phone from his pocket, immediately feeling rather shocked and confused, but he answered without a second thought. Maybe he could tell him something he was missing. Hello? Atsumu sighed as he walked through the store doors. It was cold outside so he quickly welcomed the feeling of the hot air touching his skin. He picked up a basket. Rice probably wouldn't be the only thing they needed. Getting extra things he knew they needed would definitely help. And sushi was definitely one of them. He decided as he picked up a jumbo pack from one of the fridges. He continued to walk down the aisle. He felt a little better than before from his walk to the store. The music he was listening to and the fresh air cheered him up a little. He stopped by a shelf, grabbing a bag of cookies from them. He remembered the ones he left open in the cupboard, but they'd probably be stale by now. There was also never any harm in buying some more. He hummed as he finished walking down the first aisle, then the second, then the third, grabbing whatever he assumed they needed, but he eventually found what he had come out for in the first place: rice. Tsumu. The unexpected voice practically made the blonde jump out of his skin as he tried to find the words to reply with. I am. Hey. Hinata smiled. What was it with Shoyo in this grocery store? Sakuatsu had met him in it barely days prior. Atsumu wouldn't be surprised if he actually lived in it. What are you looking for? Oh, I've already gotten everything I need. I see. I've only got a few bits left to grab. Oh, okay. The atmosphere was already tensing up. Just the look on Hinata's face informed him that he was dying to ask something. But Atsumu really and honestly did not want to answer. He knew what it would be about. Shoyo saw him upset not long ago. He was bound to have at least a few questions. And it would seem weird if Atsumu refused to answer. Hey, Tsumu. And here it comes. I didn't wanna seem weird or needy for messaging you about it. So I just didn't. I guess asking you in a grocery store isn't much better, but how are you feeling? Are you okay? I'm not really sure of what happened. Atsumu gulped and bit his lip. He had barely just forgotten about it, yet somehow he was already being reminded. He just wanted it to stop. Though it wasn't Shoyo's fault for having questions. You mentioned Sakuatsu, and I just kinda wanna make sure you guys are okay. That's all. Atsumu's head turned to the floor. Fuck. He could already feel the tears welling up in his eyes. Are you okay? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. I'm just concerned. No, it's fine. We're okay. Shoyo smiled softly despite Atsumu not being able to see it. I'm glad. Hinata looked away for a split moment before he let out a shaky breath. You were sad, and I hate seeing you sad. I just want to let you know that you can talk to me about anything. I'm here for you, okay? Both Hinata and Atsumu seemed to bite down on their lips. Shoyo was now feeling the awkwardness of the situation and he wasn't dumb. He could clearly tell the change in Atsumu's mood. The blonde couldn't even look at him, he was that ashamed. Shoyo. Yes. Tsumu. You okay? The blonde's fist clenched as he tried to pluck up the courage to say what he had to say. Finally, he gulped as he lifted his head up. A wave of tears flowed down his embarrassed cheeks which provoked a large amount of concern in the boy opposite him. Shoyo, let's talk, please. End of part 9. Red Heart. Hi besties. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm honestly sorry for the long wait, but I hope it was worth it. The next part should be out hopefully soon. I've got my mind in the right place, so let's hope. Anyways, bye besties. I'll see you in the next one.